And welcome everybody for tuning in to Mysteries of the Mind. I hope that you enjoyed the Situation Room here just before the show. It's always so full of hot topics, and today was absolutely no exception. And I'm always so impressed with the knowledge of those three gentlemen as they talk politics and things, because I remember growing up. Oh, I don't believe it was until, and this is kind of embarrassing because the majority of my family are all military, but I really struggled to have a passion for politics until September 11th. As an American, that was kind of the first time I felt like, holy cow, this is real, and that I too was penetrable. I think many Americans have kind of always thought that maybe we're a little untouchable, and we don't really have to deal with all of that which we see on the news and in other countries, and so you just kind of turn it off. And in my house, where we didn't have TV growing up, um, we didn't talk a lot about politics, and so I always felt so far behind, in school and in history, and I could never keep up with it. And it was just, you had to know the history to know the future, and you had to, know the names and the countries and everything that was going on, and it was always a little overwhelming. And so I didn't really take a huge interest until that time in my life. And so when I listened to gentlemen talk in depth about politics and how it affects us today, and just kind of what's going on in the world around us and what's really going on in the world around us, which, of course, as you know, listeners, is kind of my little fetish, the real world. What is real, right? Um, and I love that. I love the idea that you can jump on the bandwagon at any time. You can start learning about politics at any time. But the most important thing is, of course, to know your source. And I truly believe that Intrepid Radio and all of our radio hosts on this show, they do such a great job. And I love tuning in because I always feel like I'm learning something. And I hope that's the case for Mysteries of the Mind, which is what you're listening to now. And we've got 50 minutes to teach you something amazing, something subtle, something big, something strange. And today we're going to talk a little bit about nature versus nurture. And we're going to talk about criminality and predictive behavior. Now, here on Mysteries of the Mind, if this is your first time tuning in, then really this show is about getting to know you and getting to know your thoughts, getting to know what you think about things and what your perspective is, what your filters are, what makes you who you are right now, and what your opinions stem from. What seeds have been planted in your life. And it's always kind of fun for me to do that via the radio because it is a two-way street, even though I don't get to hear your voice. You're sitting where you're at in your place right now, listening to my voice. And all of the things that I would usually do to profile, or the things that I would usually do as a forensic psychologist, or even as a therapist, reading cues, nonverbal cues, your eye contact, the way that your body is moving or not moving, the way that you look, the way that you dress, the way that you respond, the pace of your breathing. So many things that go into making you who you are that are so easily seen on the outside that you may not even be aware of. And it lets me know a lot about who you are. And I use that on a day-to-day basis. I use that not just in my practice, but I also use that in my research, and I use it if I'm, ordering a Jimmy John's sub. I use it anywhere. And I think it's probably one of the most beneficial tools that I have in my life. And I've talked about here on the show before that profiling is kind of a very naughty word. We try not to use that, especially in forensic psychology, because legally that's not acceptable, right? Profiling is almost like racism. You can't do that. You can't do that. However, we are aware of statistical probability. We are aware of mannerisms, behaviors, and predictive behaviors. And in mental health, we are also aware of things that people might be struggling through or with, traumas, genetic predispositions, addiction, alcoholism. It could be something like an amputated leg. This is going to give me a big insight into how you function on a daily basis and what your future is going to look like. And I think that it's absolutely fascinating. And of course, the basis, and sometimes I don't know if it's always coupled this way, but in my head it is. So, with your permission, of course, I would like to journey with you into nature versus nurture. I think if anyone's ever done high school psychology, or you've picked up a psychology book, or you've ever struck up a conversation over coffee with Psychology 101, it's kind of like empiricism with a philosopher. And nature versus nurture is one of those early things in psychology. Either you're a Freudian or you're a Carl Jung fan, or in some cases, you're a Sigmund Freud fan or you're not. But there's also nature versus nurture. And what that's about is, of course, nature, what you're born with, your genetics, your hereditary predispositions, the color of your hair, the color of your skin, the color of your eyes. If you have a gimp leg, or you are tall, or you are, you know, born to a mother who died during childbirth. Some of these things slowly start to melt into nurture, which is going to be things described as environmental factors or conditioning. So I want to ask you to take a second, get comfortable, take a sip of your drink. Maybe it's coffee, maybe it's brandy, I don't know. And relax for a moment and think. Just open your mind for a second. Nature versus nurture. Psychology term, right? Hereditary or environment. What do you think is most impactful for human psychological development? Where do you think the majority of you has come from? Your behaviors, your habits, your addictions, your intelligence, your sexuality, your personality, your tendencies, all of it, your responses, your reactions. Where did they come from? Now, some things are going to be obvious, right? DNA, physical attributes, the quantitative type things. Long legs, brown eyes, black hair, long eyelashes. But where did you get your passion for politics, or your sarcastic charm, or your quick wit, or your tactless rebuttals, or even your athletic or musical ability? Yeah, that can get a little sticky, right? That gets to be a little more interesting. And I'm terribly interested in what you think about that. So if you're joining me on Intrepid Radio online, you can chat with me live. You can join me on Facebook or Twitter. I want your feedback. I want you to let me know. Do you think nature or nurture, this sliding scale, this duality, gosh, we see that so often, don't we? The duality, where do you think it lies? Genetic predispositions, nature, or conditioning, environment, and life experience, nurture? Now, there is no right, there is no wrong. Currently, in the field of psychology, it is an open debate. So don't be scared. Really take a moment to explore and think. And I'm going to give you some of my own intimate personal examples throughout the show. And hopefully by the end of this very quick, now 45 minutes, I want you to look at things a little differently. And hopefully that computer program of yours up there in your mind will have an additional operating program that allows you to see things in a different way. So, nature versus nurture. Are you a musical talent? Well, during the break here, I'm going to play a song that I did when I first met my husband. And it was so funny. I met him, and he is a very gifted musician. I didn't know that, of course, when we had first met. He was more of an introverted, very shy gamer kind of a man, very sarcastic, quick-witted, mysterious, evil villain type. He's my own personal hitman, if you will. And I am quite the opposite. Even though I'm a little villainish, maybe, I'm extroverted. I love to talk to people. I'm very social. That's what I do for a living. Okay. Um, and when it comes to musical talent, my mother had me playing guitar by the time I was 2, had me in piano lessons by the time I was 5, and I was Miss Parkville, later Miss Kansas City, and eventually Miss Missouri by the time I was 13. I was in pageants, I was on stage, and I was pushed because my mom was a musician. She was a very gifted performer. And my dad is a very gifted musician. He can play the harmonica, he can play the tub bass, he can play a standing cello. The majority of my family on my dad's side are all musicians. My grandparents played in a bluegrass band and traveled around the world. My uncle is a prize-winning fiddle player and banjo player. Cousins, all alike. My aunts, piano teachers. And on my mom's side of the family, very little musical ability. So I always thought, even though my mom was this very gifted singer, that maybe my musical talent had come from my dad's side of the family, the Harmon side of the family, the Millers. And I just kind of felt like it was in me. And so when I struggled with piano lessons or when I struggled with guitar, I thought, why am I struggling? This should be easy for me, right? This should be a natural ability. I'm born with this gift. It's in my blood. And that plays a big role in my mental health. I've been trying to tackle the guitar for years. And I've taken lessons, and I used to play when I was a little girl. I mean, I was 3 or 4, and I could play the guitar. And now I can't. I pick it up, and I can tinkle a few things. I can do some Metallica riffs. And I so badly want to be able to play. And I know my mom could do it. My husband can do it. My son now can do it. He's only 3. But it's such a struggle. And I could do it once. Why can't I do it now? And I've often thought it's because of my relationship with my mother. We had some obstacles, some trauma, some turbulence. And so I kind of always thought maybe I associated it with that. Or the fact that I'm even saying that I associate it with that obviously I do. There's a mental block. Well, that's kind of interesting. I thought it was in my blood. I thought that it was nature. I thought that I was gifted. Could something have happened to Beethoven that caused him to struggle with music? Could something have happened to Stephen Hawking, despite all the physical issues that he struggled with, all the happenstances, that maybe he didn't have the gifts he was born with, but then had to push even farther to present them to the world? How much of nature, things that we're born with, hereditary, genetics, are allowed to blossom through environment? Because suddenly you realize it's not a duality. It's not a linear sliding scale. It's just kind of this Thanksgiving dinner, right? It's just, maybe it's there, maybe it's not. Maybe you have to cook it, maybe you don't. Maybe you have the ingredients. You just have to put forth the effort. And hopefully you're in an environment that allows you to do that. I think it was Beethoven who said that it was not at all hard to play the piano. It's all about pressing the right keys at the right time. It's timing, not talent. But those of us who know, we know better. So then I want you to kind of think about not just an ability or a talent, the gift of gab or the ability to play soccer well, but maybe post-traumatic stress disorder, maybe mental health. Maybe you have come back from overseas. Maybe you've seen the recent movie American Sniper, and you watch how he has to function in a day-to-day environment after having been traumatized through life experience. And clearly it can change who you are. It can change how you perform. It can change your talents. It can change your ability. Physical attributes that you might be born with, maybe the just beautiful Maybe you're just attractive from birth, but then you're later disfigured from an accident. We see kind of this dance, this tango, this intertwining of nature versus nurture. And so I'm often very intrigued by people who really believe that it's one or the other. And sometimes we do see this. We see this in twin studies. That's kind of always, those debaters that get on and they say, well, if you look at twin studies, and these were really, really popular in the 1970s, and they still do them today, where you have twins that are separated at birth. This is a great opportunity to study nature versus nurture, right? You have two people born with the same genes, relatively, the same physical attributes, but they're separated. And they grow up in completely different environments. But they reunite later, or researchers study them, and maybe they don't reunite. But they learn that things as strange and just out there as a person's favorite movie or a collection of cat figurines, their partners and their personalities, their jobs, that these things begin to mirror one another despite nurture. Despite one sibling being raised in an abusive family in a Southern culture with racism and, thick traditions that females can't do this or do that, then you have the other sibling raised in San Francisco, very open-minded, very liberal, very out there. Maybe she's a lesbian for a while and everything's awesome, and they are met back up at the age of 32 and realize, despite all of their differences, all of the nurture, all of the radical opposites in their lives through adolescence and through their teenage years and through their early 20s and their rebellious phases and their life partners and their love partners and their friends and yada yada. Usually, I love that word, by the way, usually or almost always, they have found that twins are very similar. So researchers sit back with their white coats and they tap their fingers together and they say, how could this be? Is nature really that strong, that aggressive, that dominant, that everything else just becomes soluble and dissolves into the bottom? That eventually what rises to the top is your genetics. The things that you are born with, those things that are in your blood. I find that to be terribly fascinating because I think about me and my own sister, and I want you to take a second and think about you and maybe any siblings that you have, or if you don't have any siblings, maybe a family member, someone that does share a similar genetics to you. How similar are you really? My sister and I are, without quoting Paula Abdul here, opposites. We are completely different. She's got brown hair, brown eyes, very short, very, very quiet. From an early age, she had no interest in social anything. She hates sports. And she's very non-confrontational. She cannot stand an argument. I mean, she's the kind of person that will crawl up into the fetal position and start crying. Me, on the other hand, blonde hair, one blue eye, one green eye, right? I'm the milkman's child, quite honestly. And I'm extroverted. And I love social interaction. And our parents argued quite a bit growing up, which is why I think my sister gets so uncomfortable in that environment, whereas I was always the person sitting on the staircase chiming in. He didn't say that. That's not what he meant. And I can usually either play the referee or the person who's the crisis intervention or the, to try and dissolve the situation. But I'm not at all uncomfortable in the middle of an argument or conflict. And I'm wondering, my sister and I were kind of raised in the same environment. We have the same genetics. Why are we so different physically, emotionally, mentally? Now, we sound a lot alike. If you hear her and I talk, you can't tell us apart. And even though we like Depeche Mode, And even though we sing and dance similarly, um, and we like the same foods, we're very different. I think everything else might actually be different. And so I sit and I think of nature versus nurture, and I try and determine what has made me who I am. Are you an athlete? Where did that come from? Did it come through practice? Did it come through conditioning? Did it come through a phrase or a mention of someone whispering in your ear, you could get a scholarship doing this. You could be great one day. Where do your motivations come from? Ooh, I want to talk about motivations. I want to talk about motivations. I want to talk about sexual tendencies and aggression and mental health and profiling. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into our break. During the break, I'm going to play a little song that my husband and I did when we first met. It was a little jam that we did together live. It's one of my favorite songs. And don't be scared of copyright, for those of you listening out in the FCC world. It's a song that you all know, hopefully that you love as much as I do. But it kind of gives a thought into nature versus nurture. And what is it that's made you who you are? And when we come back from the break here on Mysteries of the Mind, we're going to delve a little deeper into how to utilize that into predictive behavior and criminal profiling. Here with me, your host, Sarah Soderwood. All right, everybody, welcome back to Mysteries of the Mind. That was a little blip there of my husband and I singing House of the Rising Sun. Imagine being born in New Orleans to an addict father and being strung out and always going back to that place. Even though you know it's sinful, even though you know it's bad, even though rationally you can say, I don't want to do this with my life, you find yourself being pulled back in, this gravity, this inner gravity that motivates you to do something, even if you know that it's wrong, even if you know it goes against your conscience, even if you know it goes against your morals and your ethics, and people are begging you not to do it. Sometimes you still are compelled. This being compelled, inner motivations, something I work with on a daily basis. For those of you who might be listening for the very first time, welcome to Intrepid Radio. This is Mysteries of the Mind, and my name is Sarah Soderlund, and I do forensic psychology and parapsychology research. And one of the most fascinating things for me, and one of my specialties, is neurolinguistic programming and psychopathy, and working with individuals in a forensic setting who have committed heinous crime and trying to understand the why, and also to work with assessments and treatments. So, understanding predictive behaviors, understanding the puzzle that is this complete picture, and what are the corner pieces? What are the pieces that you put down first and you say, these are the ones we need to know where they're at to even get started? All of us have those. So when I think about nature versus nurture, which is what we spent the first half of the show talking about, where some people might say it's a sliding scale. There's this duality. It's either nature or it's nurture. It's really a mix. And we kind of have to understand where we come from and what motivates us and our behaviors, and understand it's not the same for everyone, right? We're all completely different. That's probably one of the biggest challenges working in forensic psychology, is you sit across the table with someone and you're looking into their eyes and you're trying to connect with them. You're trying to find something to connect with. But this person has raped children, or burned their entire family in a fire, or beat someone to death with a manhole cover, whatever the case might be. It's an array of criminality. But you have to find some type of a connection and start to dissect this person and say, okay, what caused them to do this? What is their gravity? What is their motivation? What are their compulsions? And are they likely, regardless of nature and regardless of nurture, regardless of the judicial system, the medications, the conditioning, what's the recidivism? How likely are they to recommit and engage in this behavior again? And that's kind of a difficult task if connecting with others is difficult for you to do. So right now, you and I have this connection going, right? We're listening to one another. You're listening to me talk, and I'm really hoping that you're going to give me your feedback. And I'm excited to know what motivates you, to know what some of those gravitational pulls are in your life. And we're going to talk about the biggest things debated in the nature versus nurture, and kind of maybe where those tendencies have come from. So behavior. I'm going to give you some examples. And again, for those of you listening, if this is difficult for you, especially if you're a man, maybe you're analytical, you're rational, you're logical, you love tangible things, you love measurable things, you love statistics. And the paranormal and the religious and the philosophical and the spiritual and especially the psychological is just hokum. My husband has to remind me a lot that he thinks of my work and the analogy of meteorology. That there is a science to it somewhere. Cold fronts and warm fronts and currents and wind speeds and temperatures and things that can be easily measured. But when you're standing back watching a tornado, watching a funnel cloud, you can't always predict what exactly is going to happen. And God bless those meteorologists on the news. They can tell us every morning what they think the weather is going to be. And job stability aside, they can be wrong every day. It's very difficult to do, despite the fact that there are things that we can measure. I can draw your blood. I can look at your hair. I can look at your genetics. I can look at your physical traits and attributes. I can look at your criminal history. There are things that I can read about you, measure about you. But predictive behavior, that very naughty word, profiling, It is learned, but it's not guaranteed. It's like the wild tornado. It's very difficult to predict. For the most part, human nature, the weather, if you're sticking with me, um, we can tell you about it. We can tell you how things are going to change, what things are likely going to happen, that you should bring an umbrella just in case. And that's kind of what we are hoping, or what maybe you are hoping the judicial system is doing. You know, on the Situation Room, the show just before Mysteries of the Mind, they were talking about how do you change radical thinkers? How do you change those people that are out burning flags or banning books, or the people here in America protesting against the Confederate flag, or people across the world, not even across the world, here in Minneapolis where I'm at, ISIS. You've got terrorist individuals or individuals acting out against the majority all the time. And aren't we always going to have that? How do you change it? How do you stop it? Yeah, it's very difficult to eradicate. But we do try and be preventative, right? That's kind of what our goal is. And I think that's what the majority of people do whenever they're watching the news and you see something horrible and you see this person that's slaughtered their whole family and you go, man, I hope they, put that guy away for life. And maybe that's all that you are interested in, and that you just kind of hope that they're segregated. But the truth is that that is someone's son or daughter, husband or wife, sister or brother, and they are a person. And so we have to treat them, assess them. We have to do something with them, right? Here in America, we don't just cut off your hand if you steal something, and we don't just cut off your genitals if you rape someone, and we definitely don't put you under the guillotine just because you do something awful. A lot of times, even if we put you on death row, you're going to be there for a while, you're going to have a small TV, and you might even have an appeals process that lasts for decades. Things don't just work the way that we would like or think them to. There is a process. And in the meantime, prisons get full, people get out on parole, they run out of room, they run out of funding, people are back out on the streets, oftentimes those with mental health issues, and there's relapse. And then, of course, you see them again on the television. We go, why were they even back out anyway? Well, that was that crazy tornado. Somebody wasn't predicting something quite accurately enough, obviously. Or maybe they were, and the process, the system, we say that a lot, the system failed this person. But I want you to think about behavior. I want you to go into your mind, take a deep breath, and think about your behaviors and your habits. Where do they come from? Let's just take intelligence. Are you an intelligent person? Are you witty? Are you literate? That's obviously conditioned and taught, right? We go through school, we get taught these things, we learn how to do math, and then a few decades later they change it to Common Core and they've changed the way things are happening. Are you as smart as you used to be? Or maybe you're struggling with old age, adverse reactions to your medication or poor diet, memory loss. Is that nature or is that nurture? Do you know how to work with it? Or are you working against it? Your personality. All of those things that if you just reached out right now, if you put on your Facebook, or if you called a friend and said, list 5 adjectives about me, describe me in 5 words, the kind of words that you're going to get back about your personality, are those things that you have taken control over and been mindful about? Or are those almost unconscious whims that have become you? Do people see you as creative, and do you see that about yourself? Do people see you as loud and obnoxious? Do you think that about yourself? Are you interested in what people might think about your personality? And if that is, what is? Of course, philosophically speaking, reality, our perception of ourselves, is very different than the perception of other people, how they see us. And it's completely separate from the perception of a judicial system and of a society. Because I can tell you from experience, when you're sitting across from the table from someone who's committed a very heinous crime and broken the law, the majority of the time, they feel that they were justified. And they had a reason, they had a motivation, and they're amazed that people were surprised. Usually they're surprised that they got caught. But when you put all the pieces together, you think, wow, how did anyone miss this? Right? How did anyone miss this? Sexuality, sexual preferences. One of the most fantastic concepts that I almost think that we should dedicate a whole radio show, Fibonacci. Geometric, symmetric attraction, unconscious attraction to your partner. And I want you to plant the seed. I'm planting it right now, just in case you want to be completely aware. You've given me permission, and I'm excited about this, for you to notice from this point forward. Couples. And do they look alike? Usually the relationships, there's that word again, usually relationships that are the most successful meaning long-term, mutually attraction kind of a relationship. It's between two individuals that look similar to one another. Is that our ego? Is that a selfishness? Or is it a comfort? We look at that person in a way we see ourselves. And the connection is much easier to be made. Versus if I'm sitting across the table from a huge 300-pound black man with a huge beard and, just those very different features than my own. There's so many differences already, physically speaking. We have to find something else to have a common ground. And there's this unconscious, uncomfortable struggle to connect. But when someone looks like us, they act like us, it's that click behavior, the click mentality. And you see it a lot in adolescence, children going through the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, even through high school, depending on maturity. Athletes stick with athletes. You got your jocks over here, you got your drama queens over there, you got your cheerleaders and your popular girls over there, you got your geeks over here, your nerds over there, you got your emo kids and your radical thought people over there. And it's funny, you kind of see this theme through movies, 80s movies, 90s movies, so forth, all these movies. It's kind of the same thing. Oftentimes I see a trailer and I'm like, how many times are we going to hear this story? But it's a human relatable concept because it's a human concept. We are attracted to people like ourselves. And we do it automatically. So when we talk about racism, some of it is nurture. For example, I was raised by a Southern man, a Baptist man, who is a millwright working at Ford for almost 40 years now, who was a military man. So obviously, if we're talking about other cultures, he has some racism there. And so I had to grow up with that and around that and be aware of that in my life and think, man, some of the comments that I might think or the thoughts that I might have, do I want to change those? Do I agree with those? Did I put them there? A lot of them were put there by my father because of the life that he has led. So things that were nurture to him have become nurture to me, and the cycle continues, right? Which, of course, you can always change. Nurture is wonderful that way, even if you are in a terrible environment, surrounded by abusive people. You've had your toes burned off or your legs cut off or your face blown off or whatever, all the external factors. If you can still think and you can still be aware of you can still change your mind. You can also change your circumstances. It's kind of that blossom of hope. But you always have that ability to make a change. And that's exciting, but some of those thoughts that pop in there are difficult to change, some more than others, especially in those corner pieces of the puzzle. Those corner pieces are sexuality, aggression, personality, behavior. Are you similar to your parents? Are you as intelligent as your parents? Do you have a similar personality to your parents? I know it's strange to think about sexuality and your parents, but think about how interesting that might be that you have a similar pattern as they did, or as they might currently still have. Aggression, rage, anger, these key emotional foundations of who we are, nature or nurture. It's not always as obvious as we might want it to be, but I want to give you an example of how we might use this in profiling. I was talking to this about this today's show with my husband at dinner, and I said it's exciting. I think about my youngest son. He's a ginger. He's got red hair. What do I know about people with red hair? Well, people with red hair, they almost always, there's that phrase again, like usually, have blue eyes. They usually have pale skin. They usually have Irish heritage or an ancestry that dates back to a certain region of the world. They also are usually exiled by their peers because they are unique. So going through adolescence, when it comes time to find a partner or someone that they're attracted to, or that person that looks like them, or that peer group that looks like them, it's going to be much more difficult. So sometimes they become more introverted. Usually they are. Therefore, they're much more intelligent. They're much more creative because they have to utilize these resources within themselves to make up for the fact that they're not always seen as attractive individuals. They're also much more susceptible to sunburns, vitamin D deficiencies. They've got certain things that are going to tell me how he's going to function if he doesn't take care of his hygiene or his multivitamins or supplements, or if he stays out in the sun too long. It's likely he's not going to work a job that's in construction or landscaping, that he's going to work with what nature has given him, and he's going to choose a certain path. Unless I as a mother inherently whisper something terribly motivating to him, it's likely he will not choose a position in life that puts him on a pedestal because, again, someone with red hair, I want you to think really quick, scan your mind. Do you know any big CEOs? Any Donald Trumps? Any presidents that have red hair? The princes are the only two that come to mind. Harry, I think he still has red hair, I think. They're losing their hair as they get a little older. And that's common too, because red-haired people have less hair, larger follicles. They also have pain tolerances that are different than individuals. They have higher pain or lower pain thresholds. So cold is colder, hot is hotter. Pain is more painful. They're therefore a lot more emotional because they get made fun of. If they stub their toe, whereas we might go, ouch, 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 they're going to go, ah! And, oftentimes by their peers and their parents, people say, God, stop being such a baby. Stop being such a wimp. Stop being such a pussy. Think about how that's going to mold this person just on nature traits alone. I look at my son and I love his red hair. My mom had fiery red hair. And I think it's beautiful. But I already begin to profile how the world is going to treat him and how that will mold who he becomes. Unless he's a terribly defiant, unique individual, which he could be. He could be that lone tornado. There are things that I can already say are likely going to happen. Now, my other son, very attractive, long eyelashes, brown hair, brown eyes. He's of the majority. Scandinavian culture, very intelligent, musically inclined, a lot of athletic ability. All the men in his family are very stout, good-looking, handsome men. He's the eldest. He's the firstborn. He's more rigid. He's more independent. I can already look at him in profile. Again, what's likely going to happen? And it's interesting when you see wit, sarcasm, language skills, communication. Those are things I hit really big here on Mysteries of the Mind, especially because it's a radio program, right? And in a radio program, it's all about communication. And that is so absolutely key in changing those innate nature versus nurtures, those motivations, those things within us that sometimes we feel like we just have no control over. Communication is the key. The communication with yourself and the communication with the world. And it doesn't have to be just speaking. I'm going to end here these last 5 minutes by kind of giving you an example of what I mean. When you walk up to someone and you're meeting them for the first time, and you look at some of their nonverbal cues, you look at their shoes, you look at what someone might say, are you judging that person? No, we're not judging. But you look at the hem of their pants. How long have they had those pants? How long and how often do they wear them? Are these their special pants, their nice pants? Did they get dressed for this event? You look at their belt. Have they lost weight? Is it the same little notch that it's been there for a long time? You can tell by the wearing of the leather, by the polishing of, the belt buckle. You look at their outfit, you look at their hands. I look at my dad's hands every time I see him, just to see how much he's been working since the last time I saw him, to see if he's taking my advice to just relax. He's almost 70, for God's sakes. How are the calluses? How are the fingernails? How's the liver? Is it jaundiced? How are their eyes look? How do their cuticles look? How do their knuckles look when they close their hand after shaking? Usually when someone shakes your hand, they bring their arm back in and they close their hands either over one another, or they kind of clench their fists. Is it white around the edges? Do they have anger issues? Do they have circulation problems? Do they have iron deficiencies? I look at their teeth. I look at their smile. Are they confident? Do they have good hygiene? Are they taking care of themselves? Are they able to take care of themselves? These are really important things that we talk about in a mental health assessment. We talk about a person's affect. We talk about their description. And those are things that in a different setting we might say it's judging, but in a clinical setting, these are really important indicators for predictive behavior. If a person can't even take care of themselves, their personal hygiene is lacking, this isn't someone that really cares all that much about anything else, and they're likely to be more impulsive, more aggravated, low income, high stress. All of these things are indicators for future violent behaviors or predictive behaviors. Eye contact. Are they being honest? It's very, very, very important to pay attention. Are they sunned? I will never forget walking through the Louvre and looking at the art, especially like Renaissance art, and the women, how voluptuous they are, and feminine and curvaceous and pale. And it was, a sign of they didn't have to work. If you had big biceps and a big sunned tan, it meant you were a serf, not a lord. And I think about that today. I think about, is this person someone who's out working with their hands? Is this someone who is stuck in a cubicle? Is this someone who enjoys what they do? And I ask them, oh, what is it that you do? What words do they use? What affect do they have? How quickly do they respond? Do they respond at all? Are they engaging? Are they not? What are their passions? Do they have any? What's on their mind? All of these things, they come into play. And I'm always immediately kind of tallying nature versus nurture, nature versus nurture, nature versus nurture. Because if it's nature, there's not a lot we can do about that. I can't change the past. Sometimes in forensic psychology, we call that affective violence. However, predatory, predictive violence, psychopathy even, is in a way more of a nurture. And those things we can begin to mold. And we can hopefully change through treatment. And if you're listening, if there's anything that you don't completely love about yourself, you can change that too. And I want to challenge you. Something I mentioned through today's show was to reach out to the people around you and say, use 5 words to describe me. Ask your partner, ask your siblings, ask people on Facebook. I don't care. Just say, describe me in 5 words. And see what other people's perception of you is. And then play psychologist and see if those adjectives actually describe the person that's saying them. Because oftentimes, just like we're attracted to the people who look most like ourselves, that secret, geometric, symmetric love affair with our reflection, people will also see in you what they see in themselves. So I give you that psychological homework for the week, and I hope that you will join me next week here on Intrepid Radio as we talk mysteries of the mind with me, your host, Sarah Soderlund. Until then.
IPBN.
The Intrepid Paradigm Broadcast Platform.
IPBN is an alternative radio network of elected programs.